Andrea Morgan, and I'm part of the BCTSA SCITT, and I have responsibility for supporting trainees whilst on placement and for mentors. Thank you for listening to this recorded session. Very aware that we had to cancel and reschedule because of the weather last week, but I thought it would be helpful for you to have an understanding of hosting a trainee for second placement, and also how we're moving from Mosaic through to Teams and how you access that. So I just want to share my screen with you whilst we set up this training. Our trainees should have settled in for the week now with you, and they've got 5 more weeks to run on second placement, and we are looking forward to working with you. And just thank you already at this time for your time and care in supporting our trainees whilst they're on placement. So let me just share my screen with you. It should be coming up through now. Just wait for that to load. Okay, here we go. So preparing for that placement. This is a real crucial time as they look to embed all that they've learned, but in a different and complementary environment, which will be an interesting move as they look at the differences between their 2 placements. The week should always follow as normal. They have 1 training day per week. Our primaries are every Friday and they're in school Monday to Thursday. Our secondary, their training is on Monday and they're in placement Tuesday to Friday. As we work through that, the training each week will have a core training theme, and that then should be looked at and viewed for the rest of the week and embedded in their practice. So, for example, our trainees in secondary have looked at adaptive teaching and also behaviour, and when they are in placement this week should have that lens of what that looks like. Again, our primary last week, and we'll be embedding it this week. Again, that adaptive teaching focus will come through as they look. They are each week through their school-based activities asked to observe expert colleagues in presenting how that is presented and supported within your school environment. They've got opportunities to practice that skill in their own lesson delivery. So if we're looking at adaptive teaching, what adaptive teaching strategies are they using as they get to know the students in their class, those new classes they're taking on. They should have their weekly mentor meeting with you where they can deconstruct and co-construct those skills, and for you as a mentor to lead them through that, through the mentor blast, and I'll show you where you can locate that. That's the weekly communication I send out to mentors, and that helps bring that together, that core training and their practice each week. And then they get the opportunity to be observed and be given feedback, which is an important part of their reflective process as well, and also where they gather evidence for their module 3 as it stands now, evidence trail. So you can see how the training links in with their opportunities within their school experience for the days they're on placement. All this is linked with the ITT and ECF, and that is a process through the DFE and what's known as, how we describe as, a heavily scaffolded teaching standards, and that's the backbone of everything we do. I've given you two examples there of the Learn That and Learn How To statements. And the link for this is found on the Mental Blast each week. If you want to Google ITT-ECF, that will come through quite easily for you to find what the statements are. And so you can see through that process of being able to observe and practice, but also have that expert mentoring and feedback, allows our trainees to experience that receiving clear and concise, consistent and effective mentoring that supports their tasks, how they can stretch pupils further, etc. But also just want to highlight this second one here, creating a positive environment where making mistakes and learning from them, and the need for effort and perseverance are part of a daily routine. Our students are novice at this, our trainees are novice, and so they will make mistakes. They will need that feedback, that time to reflect, that time to improve and really hone in on the skills they're doing. And they're moving from 5 hours to 7 hours of teaching over this 6-week period. So they're beginning now to teach more sequence of lessons, and for their planning to show that depth of knowledge and understanding as well will be good. Where this sits within their training program, this part of their second placement, is we're coming up to halfway through. We're on half term 3, building up to those 7 hours. The second placement should give them an opportunity to experience a different setting. It might be that they've not quite taught the year groups that you're giving them, so they get that complementary experience. The teaching hours are building up, so by the end of this half term they should be up to 7 hours. Unless you're supporting a salaried trainee, in which case they can be teaching up to 14 hours straight through, and that meeting those teaching expectations. So we're still asking our trainees to plan and submit lesson planning. We're asking them, if they're non-salaried, to do for all of their lessons, because they're still honing those skills of that lesson plan, of retrieval, of the I do, we do, you do elements, of being able to model, narrate their own thinking, introduce new material in small chunks, and assessing through questioning and using formative assessment strategies. So we're really wanting that to be continue to be developed over this period of time. If you're supporting a secondary trainee, we might then say 1 or 2 formal lesson plans need to be submitted. However, all lessons need to still be planned, and that might be through some additional notes on a PowerPoint, etc. But it depends on what you're wanting there. We ask that at least 24 hours in advance, but trainees have been told that whatever the school system is, I know some schools work on a 48-hour in advance system. Primary setting might want the planning the week before, and our trainees should be fitting in to your process and procedures on there. They'll then go on to build up towards Easter, 11 hours and etc. So they really need to be on target by the end of this time of 7 hours. If you feel that your trainee in a couple of weeks' time are not quite hitting that, you need to just let me know so that we're aware of that and we can put some additional support in. And it might be a bit of a bespoke process is needed. We want quality rather than quantity all the time, but our trainees should now be up to where they're getting into the rhythm and routine of planning and submitting and delivering lessons over that period of time. We are coming up to halfway through that point, and by the end of this experience, this second placement, you will be sent a link to a progress review 3, which is just for you as a mentor to capture the learning journey your trainee has been on, what they've done really well, and some targets to move on in the future. So just to be aware that that will come, and the deadline to submit that will be Friday the 13th of February. So we'll communicate that clearly with you, and we'll send access to that once the time comes to complete that. They are on module 3, and they have weekly information about module 3 and what that looks like. So that can be shared with you regularly, and you'll have access to the teams for that. We are just moving forward, all our trainees, whilst they're in your setting, should have had a school induction, including safeguarding training. They have generic safeguarding training, and we revisit that regularly, but this is school specific. Last week's task was for them all to identify who the DSL was and how the reporting procedures specific to their new context. They should now know the routines of the day, have a general timetable of what that looks like, of up to 14 hours in class experience, and then some out of class time to do some planning and those school-based activities, but also routines including when your assemblies are, when form times are, when your registrations are, training as well, school training, when your phase meetings or when your departmental meetings are. So our trainees should be capturing some of that and then embedding that in their weekly and daily routines now. All trainees should have been shared the behaviour policy, and last week's focus was to observe that in practice of what that looks like in each setting. Also to have access to schemes of work and that procedure for submitting the planning in a timely way that we've talked about. Our schemes of work, they should have access to that and to enable them to get ahead of themselves for planning. Also that timetable of observation and teaching, they'll have a timetable of 14 hours for in the classroom, 5 of which they'll be teaching, building up to 7, but the rest of them is observing and being an active support and TA within the classroom and really working with those students that you direct them to. Our training focus across Module 3 cover the 5 areas that we focus on: behaviour management, adaptive teaching, assessment and feedback, pedagogy and classroom practice. So that should be embedded more and more. So for yourself, if you can make sure that they're all, although that has been supported for our trainees. The timetable, I've talked about 14 hours being on their timetable where they should have that teaching hour. I've given an example of a suggestion of how they build up. So by February half term, to be on track, they should be delivering 7 hours solo teaching. Some of you will do hour lessons, some of you do much less if you're in a primary, or in some might do an hour and 15 lessons. So we talk about it in hours rather than lessons there. Each week should be a weekly mentor meeting, and then also one formal observation and feedback per week as well. The trainees have all been given a focused formal observation form that they should be sharing with whoever's observing them to complete. So that's an idea of them building up their teaching hours. The mentor expectations for you, the mentor blasts, this is the communication each week I send out to you via Teams it will be, but I'll give you information of how to locate them. Also understanding the ITT and ECF and the research focus. The mentor blast gives you what Ofsted call the granular detail of what the training looks like and how that's embedded in the classroom practice. Also that lesson plan feedback, when they're sending you their lesson plans in advance, if you could just give them a little bit of feedback, that would be helpful. That observation feedback and statements to be linked with really the ITT and ECF and the training focus for that week. Mentors to do wellbeing check-ins. We check in on Friday and Mondays, but you often see them in a different light, and if you can let us know if there are any issues for us to follow up, that would be really helpful for us as well, because you see them more than we do in the 4 days they're in school. Just the general organisation, making sure trainees have access to keys for rooms, photocopying codes, codes for any online materials that you use, and also additional training with your professional mentor within your school would be helpful. It's also helpful for them to have lanyards to be able to get into school, emails, addresses. If you can set that up, that's really helpful for them to access communication across the school. And also if they can have a laptop, a school laptop, or access to the school to the internet whilst they're in school, that works differently for each school. Also, they should have had that school induction, which I mentioned with safeguarding. So there's a couple of things for you to make sure that you've been able to put into place. And I know it might be this week, then that's all really formatted properly. So thank you for that. The trainees will bring with them, they should have all had their vetting letters and photo ID. I know I dealt with a couple of issues last week, but that should now all be sorted to meet your safeguarding policies. They've got a 5-to-1 booklet. This is a paper-based booklet that they should be handing out to the class teachers or whoever's observing them for the non-formal observations. And this helps capture sort of those less formal targets, but something that can help them tick along nicely on that. They should also have been sharing their progress review 2 with you and the targets for that. Many of them will link to a new setting, some of them might not be. I'm aware that in primary they might have had Key Stage 2 targets that don't quite fit into their Key Stage 1 experience, or the SEND provision that they're doing, or likewise for the secondary. So they should be sharing that for you to have an understanding of the journey they've been on. They should have also sent you a trainee biography, little bio in that introductory email before Christmas, a little bit about themselves. They should also bring with them their planning and the pro formas that they should be using, and that's for salaried and non-salaried. There are slight differences in how much planning and submission that needs to be given. And also a few of our trainees we've identified through Progress Review 2 need to be put on a support plan just to help really help them focus on what they need to improve on over this next 6 weeks, and that will have been communicated quite often by myself or by the subject lead, and they have a 2-week support plan process. And if your trainee is on a support plan and you've got that in front of you, then it should be reviewed in 2 weeks, and then at the bottom of the support plan you can just capture the conversation and evidence towards meeting the targets. And if you can send those back to myself, then we will monitor that and see how that goes. So just to support you with that on there. Some work we've been looking at is about giving effective feedback and looking at targets. At this stage, our trainees should be really supporting that conversation of feedback with their own reflective skills. I often share that I start with my feedback by asking them how they think the lesson went, and I'll often do that by scoring 0 to 10. Where would you place your lesson? 0 not being very good, but 10 being very good. Where would you place it? They'll often sort of say about a 4 or a 5, and I'll say, right, what would make it a 4? What were you pleased with? And get them to unpack that a little bit in a positive light. And then I'll say, well, what would have made it a 7 or an 8? And so they can look at that, what went well, and then the even better if. And then for you to set targets to support that progress, linked if you can with the training themes. So I've given an example here that often during a lesson observation you notice that the trainee often asks, does everyone understand, as a way of assessing pupils. We would say that that's not an effective assessment strategy because it doesn't tell you what the students understand and what they don't. Linking it to an ITT-ECF link, structuring tasks and questions to enable the identification of knowledge gaps and misconceptions would be a helpful target, that where they pre-plan the tasks and the questions to support that assessment of pupils. And our trainees have recently completed an ITAP on assessment, looking at hinge questions, mini whiteboards, think, pair, shares, types of assessing, that formative assessment strategies. So you could then be as specific of saying, you know, your target is to use a think, pair, share formative assessment activity in your next lesson to support them. So just for you to think and consider at that point would be helpful there. Right, so I've gone through the practical process of hosting the day-to-day processes of hosting a trainee. What I want to do now, I'm just going to stop presenting in this way, is to support you of how you can locate on Teams. We've moved away from Mosaic this term, and all our resources now are put on Teams. So I am going to now share my screen again and show you how you can locate that the process. So let's see how well we go in sharing my screen. Okay, ignore that for the moment. Let's just put this on. So you should now see my screen, which is a Teams screen. Now, what I'm looking at in particular are two folders. You will have been sent an invite to access these Teams folders, the secondary cohort and the primary cohort. Ignore everything else there, just for my access for staff. So let me just click on the secondary cohort. Now it's really important here, once you click on that, it'll look like nothing's in, but somehow with Teams you have to go to the top and click on files. It always goes to posts, and that's not helpful at all. When you click on files, it now displays the folders that you need to access. And if I click on all secondary resources, it would be the same for all primary resources. There are folders that will have looked similar for those who had access to Mosaic. So you've got the policies, the handbooks and calendars. We've got Mentor Blast. So let me just click on the Mentor Blast, and I'm going to go into full time, and I'm going to go to half term 3. You will see last week's Mentor Blast, and then I've just uploaded this week's training. So they've had training today, all secondary, and it's in there for you to click on. And if you click on that, you will see then a week by week process of what we do in training. So it will clearly state which week it is. It will give you some key information on here. I'm just going to hover on the secondary. I want you to note that next week, so that's the week of the 19th, training is on the Friday, and so all trainees will be in on the Monday. So there's a slight difference there. There's a snapshot of the training on each Mentor Blast, and this is for primary and secondary, of what they've done. There's the ITTECF links that they focused on, and then also the school-based activities are here. And this is when they're not in lesson. These are what they should be doing throughout that time where they've been away from out of the classroom, and also along with planning. As we scroll down, there's some hints of what your mentor meetings should look like, the discussion points linked with their school-based and training experience. Okay, so that they are put on each week to support you understand what the Mentor Blasts, where to find the Mentor Blasts. The other key information in each phase is the module resources. So if I click on that, again, go to full time, they're in module 3. And if I click on module 3 here on this one, this gives you the overview. So it's the one in capital letters saying secondary, and the primary will have the same. Just whilst that's at loading, if I scroll down to the bottom, there's a week by week approach to training. So if I go, that was last week, and they did online training, and then this week from the 12th we've done behaviour and adaptive teaching, and then also we've done a session on preparing to look for jobs on there, and it will be the same, a similar process for primary on that as well. Okay, so we've given you an idea of where to find things. Let me just go back to Teams. The observation, focused formal observation, are also in this module 3, and then some other activities that the trainees need to access. Okay, So if I click back to the secondary resources, there's training recordings for our trainees to access, and then the training resources there. Okay, and if I just popped into secondary, where have we gone to? Sorry, that was secondary. If I just pop into primary, again, you should have had the invite if you're primary. Remember to go to the files, and then you will click on primary resources. You can see there's lots there to go through. And if I look at the mentor blasts for the primary, you can see that they're in there. Now they have training on a Friday, and I set the mentor blast for the following Monday, so when they start their school experience. So that's where you locate the mentor blast and training materials. You should have had an invite. If that hasn't happened, please email me and we'll sort that out. Right, the other thing I want to touch base with is trainee evidence. Now, you don't have access to this, but the trainees do. So when you're running your mentor meeting, I'd like them to have their trainee evidence file open whilst you've got your mentor blast. So for them, they've got a link, and they'll remember to go to files, and it will show. And if I go to, let's do a primary one this time as an example. If I go into primary, and we'll just have a look at Chelsea's. She should upload her module 3 evidence in this folder. But what I want to show you, each trainee has on their personal trainee evidence folder is this targets and mentor meetings. So to record their mentor meetings, they need this open. Okay, so this is the equivalent to Mosaic when our trainees uploaded evidence for the mentor meeting and captured reflections, etc. So this is how we're going to do it. Chelsea's not had a chance to fill hers in from last week, but there's a couple of examples of what it should look like, and then there's a tracking each week. So if their mentor meeting happened, I don't know, on Thursday, they put the date in. A summary of their mentor meetings, of what you've discussed. Now, last week would have been quite practical of the timetable. It might be of that induction. You can see here on the example, there's not lots here, but it's just about some guidance of what that looks like. They can track the number of lessons they've taught, when their formal observation was, what that was, what lesson it was, which class, which phase, and then a key target for that. So it could be that key target was to use a variety of formative assessment strategies, and you would put that in. You wouldn't fill, these two would only be filled in these last two columns, reflecting on the previous week's target. Now, the trainee is fully responsible to filling this in, and it should be completed each week. And for you to prompt them and say, could you open up your targets and mentor meeting Excel document, and they should then bring that up. So they're responsible for that. We can check in. You can't, unfortunately, but I would be suggesting in your mentor meetings that they have that open in front of them and they fill it in there and then. So as you're talking, they can be typing that, and that would be really helpful for them. So that's one of the things that we've adapted, moving away from Mosaic, which was our online platform, for them to be capturing. But what is good about it is that we can see over the time of this idea of the summary points, which should always have a reference to the training, when those mentor meetings happened, but also the number of lessons being taught, so we can, as a central team, look and to see how on track they are, and then also those targets as well. So that's really helpful for you to know if you can access the teams. For you, it's the primary cohort or the secondary cohort. And for our trainees, they'll have access to the primary or the secondary, but also to their trainee evidence file. I'm going to stop sharing now. So I think that's all the information that you need. If there is any issues or complications, or you want to share anything, then just get back to me. I will email information out as and when over the next few weeks. But if there are any issues, please don't hesitate to get back in touch with me, and we'll be on that. So thank you for your time in listening to this, and we look forward to working with you over this next 5 weeks now, whilst you're hosting the trainee. Thank you.